About the fairy world. Told by Ella. A short story to dreams, a book number 1 of the Throne of Flames, a Fae fantasy romance series. Written by Misha Quinn, 2023. Copyright Misha Quinn. 2023, all right reserved. Auto-narrated audiobook, Mike Monster Pro Max license, 2023. About the fairy world. I will tell you what I learned about the fairy world I discovered myself in. When I returned to my familiar world, Mage Voldemar answered my questions about why the Thunder world was the way it was and not how some tales describe the fairy worlds. Despite the rush, as soon as I returned to my world and bombarded the mage with questions, he sent me to the library. The mage gave me code words to search the library, and I found many books on the subject. But only one Voldemar recommended I should read. It was the alchemist Theophrastus von Hohenheim's book on the world of elementals. Armed with these recommendations, I ran to the library. I quickly found the book I needed in its vast database. But it had to be ordered, as no one in our neighborhood library had ever read it. At a complete loss, I asked the librarian to find out which library I could find and take it to read, even if only in the reading room. The librarian, a guy with piercings all over his body, visible from under his clothes, and eyes lined with black eyeshadow, cheerfully replied, "You can get it right here." And he gave me the address of the Central City Library. I rushed into the street and, catching a cab, braked, shouting to the driver in a hurry. "Hurry, I need to get to the Central Library. Here's the address." And she handed him a crumpled piece of paper. The cab driver looked at me like I had escaped from a home for the insane. However, having seen many strange passengers, he thought I was pretty harmless. He briskly threw the car into the stream of cars on the metropolis streets but could not mutter intelligibly. "Well, how long have I been working, and to have a passenger in such a hurry to the library? Is this the first time?" But I paid no attention to his mutterings, absorbed in what this book would reveal. When I arrived at the site, I saw a huge building that looked nothing like a library. But its super modern design still needed to hide the windows with many shelves filled with books. I understood it was a fantasy world, and that was where I was going. Upon entering the library, I went to the computer monitor and typed a few words about the book I was looking for. A list opened up. No, it was not a list, but just the title of one book I was looking for. The other books on the list were just derivatives of it, written by someone about it. But I only wanted the original. After getting from the computer data the department number of the hall and the shelf where this treasure was located, I ran to find the book. The Book of Paracelsus stood on that shelf as if waiting for me. The cover was unremarkable, and it did not stand out on this shelf, which wasn't densely filled with other works about the world of unusual creatures, fae and otherwise. Taking the book, I opened it carefully. It was something other than Paracelsus' original text. It was a translation of his work into English. But I would not have understood a different text. After all, Paracelsus was a Swiss subject in the Middle Ages, and I did not know the language in which he produced his original works. Great, hurry to the reading room, I thought, and, finding a cozy corner with a couch hidden in the nook of the library's reading room, I took the seat and, making myself comfortable, read a book. With each page, the worlds of fae, mermaids, dwarves, and fire people held my attention. I could not tear myself away as I studied the descriptions of the creatures that lived in these worlds. Paracelsus, according to the translator, wrote his interpretation of understanding the worlds of other creatures, such as the face, by analyzing the stories created by ancient pagans. The people of antiquity believed for good reason that there were worlds, that these worlds existed, in contact with our world of humans. Reading this work by the great alchemist Paracelsus, I wondered, and why do we know so little about these worlds that coexisted alongside ancient humans and their civilizations? Have we become so far removed from nature that we do not even know that literally in our garden can live fae or elves? And dwarves who store treasures in the bowels of the earth? And fire spirits who can pass through walls and stones? Are all these only fairy tales? We know most of all about mermaids, but only because, according to legend, they most often appear in the world of men. They are told about them many times in the works of writers who romanticize these lovely creatures who seem to be created to appear on the shores of lakes and seduce men. After all, the writers of those times, when the most famous literary works about mermaids were written, were men in their majority. After reading Paracelsus' book for an hour, I grabbed it and, after checking it out at the library, rushed home, retaking a cab. However, a librarian, a lovely woman, stopped me halfway to the exit of the library hall and said, "If you're so interested in fairies, you should also familiarize yourself with the world of witches and wizards." I froze in place. Everything was happening for a reason, but according to some plan created by forces over which man had no control. I turned to her and answered, "Yes, I would take a book like that at the same time. What kind of work is it?" She handed me a small, tattered book and read through and through. I looked at her in surprise. Realizing my unspoken question, the librarian replied, "Never mind, this book is old. We've had it for a long time. But it's so popular with young people that, you can see the result." Yes, I could see the tattered cover and the marks someone had drawn on it with an ink pen. They were symbols. I decided to read the second book someday. The woman put the book in my name, too, and I grabbed the second book and ran out of the hall and back to the cab stand. This time, I was calmer and did not yell at my home address. As I rode in the cab home, different thoughts were going through my head. Like that, I thought I had now gained a basic knowledge of the world of fairies. Paracelsus did not tell me much about this world or the world of fire people, salamanders. The main thing that I understood from his book, read on the fly, was that the world of these creatures exists right next to ours. We do not have access to it. But these creatures can appear right next to us and affect our lives. And I also knew now that only Voldemar's magic could help me re-enter the Fae world where my love remained. When I arrived home, I found Voldemar and my grandmother Lily talking peacefully as if nothing was happening around them. Right from the threshold of my apartment, I rushed over to them and, slapping Paracelsus's book irreverently on the table where they were sitting, I addressed the magician demandingly. "There, I have read it. Now I need your story about the world where you willed me to find myself." The mage patted the book soothingly with the palm of his hand and said, looking at me, "Now I see you are the head of my story. So listen." The mage leaned back in his chair and placed his hands on his lap, looked somewhere up at the ceiling, and began the story. Many centuries ago. No, many millennia ago, the world was different. Gods and giants ruled it. We know all this mostly from Greek and Egyptian mythology, which are well studied since the ancient Greeks and Egyptians left us descendants with much material evidence of their culture and beliefs. The mage sighed and continued. The world is different now. We don't believe in the supernatural, or we do, but we think this supernatural must be of unearthly origin. But it isn't, or rather, it isn't, really. He reached for the glass of water that Grandmother Lily had thoughtfully placed before him on the table. Voldemar continued, sipping water from the glass little by little in the pauses between sentences. But now I am not speaking of the ancients' beliefs, but of the world that existed then and still exists today, the world of the elements, water, earth, and fire. The Fae belongs to the world of air. According to the data studied and described by Paracelsus, the world of air is the element of the Faerie in which they feel at home. It is their chaos. Clearly, the dwarf planet is Earth, the water world is inhabited by mermaids, and fire is the world of extraordinary people to which Paracelsus included salamanders. I nodded my head in agreement, and impatiently and disrespectfully toward the magician, I tapped the fingers of my right hand on the tabletop as if asking him to continue the story. Voldemar did not notice the tapping and continued only after drinking the rest of the water. Putting the empty glass away, he continued his usual manner, gesturing widely with his thin hands and a musician's fingers. If you have read Paracelsus' treatise carefully enough, you might have noticed that he tells you almost nothing about salamanders, except that their element is fire, that they are rarely seen, only if you look closely, you can sometimes see silhouettes burning fire and passing through the walls of buildings in total darkness. He also noted that they are tall and slender creatures that hardly ever communicate in the language of humans. I nodded and looked expressively at the mage, waiting for further explanation about salamanders. Let's leave for later the question of why Paracelsus described only salamanders so sparingly. The rest of the elemental species are characterized by him, including the Fae or the elves. So, more general information about the world of elementals, they are something between humans and spirits. And the essential thing that Paracelsus emphasizes more than once in the very beginning of his book is that these creatures have no soul, of course, in understanding the religion to which he belonged. But people before the start of this religion believed in these creatures. They could communicate with them, worshipping them almost as gods. And it was this that Paracelsus recognized, which was a breakthrough for the world because according to the then church he belonged, it was a world of devilish beings without souls. Voldemar once more interrupted his narrative and stared at me from under his round spectacles. I also stared at him, already impatient for the end of his story. As I was satisfied with my interest, the magician continued. The Faes belong to the superior race of this world, to which we normally have no access. They have everything: magic, the ability to penetrate material bodies, i.e., pass through walls. Fae men and women have an almost human appearance and a social structure like human society. But why did I see that world as if everyone there came out of the Middle Ages? If their world is much older, as you say, I asked. The mage looked at me with interest, like a hopeless bully who suddenly wanted to become an excellent student. He replied. Yes, this question is quite logical. The Fae world is much older than ours precisely because their life cycle is so long. Their capabilities are more significant than our human ones. Whether we believe they have a soul, you may have noticed that the feelings and behaviors of the Fae are like those of humans. You have seen their world as your knowledge of the fantasy world, from fairy tales, legends, and fiction, has prepared you for it. The Fae world is quite the same as ours. It has progress, Not technical progress, but magical progress. It has times of stagnation and times of development. You have entered their world when profound changes are brewing there, and a period of stagnation is replaced by growth. And yet their world looks like the tales of the ancients have presented it to us. I would say that perhaps the world of humans is someone's attempt to recreate the world of the Fae but in a simplified form. Probably, believing people and scientific experts will criticize this theory, but it is only my theory. I do not call anyone to believe in it. But I may say what I think since you asked me about Fae. I, completely stunned, leaned back in my chair. So you're saying that I was transported back many centuries to the Fae world? The mage replied briefly. Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. And there is a vast difference in time between our worlds. When you are away from the Thunder's world, changes cannot be reversed, just as time cannot be turned back. You can be transported to the same point, but time will pass, and you will see a quite different place than you left there. Panic rose in me, and I said, So, let's get down to business. How do I get back in? The magician looked at me with evident pleasure. Grandma Lily, who had been listening to our conversation with Voldemar all this time without saying a word, suddenly asked. So you love him, your Thunder? I, lowering my head from the longing that came over me and the tremendous sense of guilt before my beloved, whom I had left there alone to fight for his future, in which he had no life without my love, replied. Yes, I love Thunder. And I would do anything to be by his side. Voldemar, please take me back to the Fae world immediately. Voldemar rose abruptly from his chair and ran across the room, almost shouting. That's exactly what I'm going to do, Isabella, bring you back to the Fae world. The end.